Amen. Thanks so much, Sam. It's lovely to be here with you, and particularly on Mothering Sunday, as we kind of remember those who are near and dear to us who've been showing that love and nurture. And although it's Mothering Sunday, the first topic that Sam has asked me to speak on is the loving father, which you think kind of, it should have been the loving mother. Could it have been the loving mother rather than the loving father? But I think, was it 2-3 weeks ago, my son came up with Dave Mitchell and did a little kind of little story. And it's an interesting dynamic where, because we dedicated, a bit like Barnaby, we dedicated Matthew here in this room 29 years ago. And in those days, it was kind of, this is Matthew, my son. And now I'm Matthew's dad. And things kind of, when I'm introduced down at Woodlands. So it's that's how kind of parenting kind of goes sometimes. So there you go, Annie and Matt, you've got that to look forward to. So we're looking about these next few weeks, a journey towards the cross. And how do we understand the idea of Jesus' death and Jesus' resurrection? How do we understand that story that we would frequently remember when we come to communion? And what impact and difference could it make to us? This time of year, I get invited to do toddler services. Here's kind of one from way back. And I know Libby was here, and I did bring Maurice along today because she often asks me, kind of, where's Maurice? I have this puppet monkey that helps me to do toddler services. And when it comes to Easter, it's quite hard. I mean, what do you do at an Easter toddler service? Because quite often, when you do a Christmas one, Christmas is great with toddlers because it's all about shepherds and sheep and kings and babies and presents. And Christmas is quite easy to do at a toddler service. But when it comes to Easter, how do you explain to toddlers about somebody being brutally tortured and nailed to a cross? How do you explain to toddlers that death 2,000 years ago actually changed the whole of history? How do you explain about kind of a resurrection? And it's quite tricky for us as adults, isn't it? Let alone for toddlers. And so as we start this journey towards the cross, what I will always do at a toddler service is I will tell stories about being lost and found. Because as the journey towards the cross, for me, that is what the story is about us being lost, and the Easter story about God coming to find us. And so the bit of Luke that we're looking at this morning is three stories that Jesus tells. Three stories that are about things that were lost and things that became found. So you may know these parables of Jesus really well, or if you're a guest or a visitor, actually you may never have come across these. But there's a story about a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and one of the sheep wanders off, and the shepherd goes to find and rescue that lost sheep. The second story is a story of a woman who has 10 precious coins, and one of those coins gets lost, and how she clears the whole house. She carries on searching until she finds that lost coin. And the third is about a lost son, and we're going to read that story in a moment. And I suppose as we read these stories, we kind of think that, okay, we're like the lost sheep. We're like the lost coin. We're like the lost son. And God is like the shepherd who comes to search for us. Actually, God is like the woman who searches for the coin. It's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus was very happy to use a female descriptor for God. God here says God is like a woman who's coming to look for you. And on Mothering Sunday, we do often think about God as Father, but actually there are times where we read in the Bible that kind of, even if a mother who's nursing a child may forget that child, that maternal instinct, God says, I'm like a mother who will never forget you. Jesus, as he looks at Jerusalem and he sees that they're like sheep without a shepherd, he says, how kind of the emotion that I'm feeling at the moment is a bit like a mother hen who wants to gather the chicks. And here there's a woman who has lost something that's precious, and with determination will go and search. Of course, God is neither male nor female, is he? God is God, and he created us, male and female, in his image. But sometimes these images help us to understand him a bit better. So here's a woman. But in the third story, here's a man who has two sons. And we'll read the story here, and we'll see what this tells us about God and about us. Now, the tax collectors and sinners all gathered round to hear Jesus. Okay, the tax collectors and sinners, they were the no-hopers in life. Those are the ones that society didn't really hold in high regard. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. And we have the parable of the shepherd and the sheep. And we have the parable of the lost coin. And then we come on to verse 11. It says this, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth on wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to the citizen of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms round him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." Here's a very familiar story of being lost and found. And as we look at this journey towards Easter, it is a journey towards this concept of a world being lost and a world being found. And it's just 3 brief things I wanted to say from this story about this journey. The first, I think the journey to the cross is a journey of love. It's a journey of love. And I'm not sure if that's, when you think about the cross, that's always the image that you think of. I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes I overanalyze worship songs. Anyone else is an overanalyzer of worship songs? The one this morning, I had it down in my notes, and I didn't know Luke was going to sing it. The one we had sung this morning, great song. It comes to this little kind of line that says, "His buried body began to breathe." And the theologian inside me goes, no, his buried body didn't begin to breathe. Lazarus, when he was in the grave, his buried body began to breathe. Jairus' daughter, her body wasn't buried, but began to breathe. Actually, when Jesus was in the tomb, his body disappeared. And he was resurrected, not with the body that stopped breathing is now breathing. He has a brand new resurrection body. In fact, that's the wonderful hope of the resurrection, is one day these bodies will be buried and they will no longer breathe. But because of Jesus, we get brand new resurrection bodies that will never die. They will always breathe. And Jesus' resurrection body was kind of looked like Jesus, kind of didn't. Kind of ate fish, kind of walked through walls. And that's our living hope, is that one day we will get brand new resurrected bodies, not just buried bodies beginning to breathe. Now, I know it's poetic, and worship leaders will tell me that. Tim, don't be so silly. It's just poetry. And I know, but something inside me thinks, there's a greater truth around the resurrection, that song is talking about living hope. But another song that there's a little phrase in it that each time I look at it, the wrath of God is satisfied. Do you know that the song kind of says that the wrath of God is satisfied? When we think about the cross, somehow God's wrath is being satisfied on the cross. That somehow God is really mad with you. God's really mad with humanity. God's really mad, and he's kind of somehow he's got to take out his wrath on somebody, on something. And that somehow the cross is predominantly to do with God's wrath being satisfied. And again, I kind of struggle with that, because I think the cross is, as I put here, it's a journey of love. Actually, it's about love that took Jesus to the cross, and not wrath. It wasn't God was so cross with the world, he gave his only son. God was so mad with the world, he gave his only son. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And there's something about the story of the cross that we need to understand it predominantly as a story of rescue. It's a story of love. That God is holy, but where you put holiness so high that actually wrath is the thing that needs to be kind of meted out, I think you miss the fact that God is love. He is personal. Again, quite often I'll say this to people, is that actually when you look at the Bible, words like omniscient, omnipresent, kind of omnipotent, they're kind of Greeky words thinking about God. When you look at the Bible, there's relational words. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To Moses, I am being who I am being. To Jesus, when he says, a father. To speak to God as our Father. When John in his epistle tries to describe kind of how would I describe God? Well, he's like light and he's like love, because love is the predominant characteristic of God. And so when we think about the cross, it was because of love. It was because God loves us. That's the journey. It was for the joy that's set before him, he endured the cross. What's the joy that he endured? Was it the fact that his wrath was satisfied? Was that the kind of the joy that that's why he endured the cross? Oh, eventually the wrath of God's going to be satisfied. That's going to be a happy day. Actually, no, it's that people could come and find God and know him as a heavenly Father. Could encounter his grace and his hope and his forgiveness. Actually could enjoy that relationship with God. And the journey to the cross is a journey of love. And I wonder whether this morning, when you think about God, when you think about Good Friday, when you think about Easter Sunday, I wonder if there's something in your heart that says, actually, here is somebody who's coming to find me. The reason behind that is because of love. His love for you, his love for me. Irrespective of whether you would call yourself a Christian or whether you'd be somebody who thinks you've lived a decent enough life to deserve to be loved, the truth is that the journey to the cross is a journey of love, because God created you, God knows you, God loves you. He always has, and he always will. The second thing that I think about the journey to the cross, actually, it is a journey towards the lost. It's a journey towards the lost. So in these three stories, there's always something that is lost. The sheep that kind of wanders off. Actually, the coin, we don't know how the coin got lost, but it was lost. And the son in the story that we read, who decided to wander off, who decided to take all that God has and fritter it away. And I suppose, in a way, that's the nature of love. The nature of love gives the possibility for lostness. Because God is love, and God created a world where he wanted people to encounter him, to know his love, that he gave us the possibility, the capacity to love. And when we have the capacity to love, we have the capacity both to hate. When we have the capacity to obey, we have the capacity to disobey. When we have the capacity to follow and be with God, we have the capacity to wander away from God. And here we find lostness. And we look around society, and actually, you don't have to look too far before you find lostness. Lost souls, people who just are wandering through life, not knowing, kind of having no anchor, no sense of purpose, no sense of destiny. You see some of our communities where they've lost all sense of hope or dignity. And we're living in a society where lostness is a consequence of people going their own way, of doing their own thing. The son, through his choices, ended up being lost. His choices of saying, I know that one day when you die, half of your wealth will be mine. I can't wait for you to die. I wish you were dead now. Because I don't want you, I want your stuff. And in some way, God creates a world. God creates a world where he wants to be with you. He wants to love you. He wants to be loved by you. And many people live life saying, God, I want your stuff. I want to enjoy the world that you've created. Go on my holidays and enjoy the scenery. I want to enjoy the body that you've given me with the health and the well-being that I can enjoy. I want to enjoy the benefits of a mind or an intellect that can study. I want to enjoy the skills that I have that mean that I can have a job. I want to enjoy the gift that a child is to me, that I can enjoy family life. But God, I don't want you. I want what you've given, but I don't want you. And that's the story of the lost son. He chooses the stuff rather than God. And in a world that chooses stuff rather than God, we end up being lost. And in our lostness, there's nothing. Actually, that sheep becomes, in its lostness, becomes helpless. Actually, there's nothing that sheep can do. The shepherd has to go and find it. That coin is lost. It's inanimate. It can't do anything about its lostness. The woman has to go and find it. And there's something about in our lostness that we can't do anything to earn God's favour, earn God's love. There's nothing we can do to get him to, for us to be kind of better people. Actually, we have to be found. And the journey to the cross is that journey towards lost people. Actually, towards people like you, towards people like me. We are lost without God. And in some ways, God is lost without us. God's lost without you. He created you because he wanted to know you. He wanted to love you. And if you choose not to know God and not to follow him and to be with him, actually, that's a loss to God. But he wasn't prepared to leave it that way, which is why the cross is a great rescue adventure. It's a great rescue adventure where we, in our lostness, could do nothing to once again put ourselves in connection with God. And Jesus comes, and he lives, and he dies, and he comes back to life again, so that we can be found. I suppose in the story that we read, did the son have a choice? And I suppose the son, unlike the sheep and the coin, actually the son does have a choice. He could stay in his lostness. Now, there's nothing that he could do to make his father love him. Actually, there's nothing he could do to make his father accept him back. There's nothing he could do to be a son again. In fact, that was all to do with the father. But he could make the choice to decide life at the moment isn't working. Life at the moment isn't good enough. Actually, life at the moment, I'm lost. I'm lost in a foreign country. I'm lost doing things that good Jewish boys shouldn't do. I'm feeding the pigs. And in his lostness, he makes a choice. He decides, I will go back because I've got this hunch that with my Father, with God, life is better than the life I'm experiencing here. Even if he doesn't have me back as a son, but if I just go back as a slave, actually, at least there'll be food, at least there'll be a bed to sleep in, a roof over my head at night. And he makes a choice to go back. And I suppose that's for each one of us. There comes a moment where we say, in our lostness, in some ways there's nothing we can do about that. It has to be God. But the thing that we can do is, do we choose? Do we choose to acknowledge the life that we've been living? Do we choose to acknowledge our lostness and our selfishness? Do we choose to say, I'm going to turn around and head back to God? And I suppose it just takes that small little moment of choice. And God responds. I think I might have told some of you a story about a friend of mine called Les, and he was high up in the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, where I used to live in Norfolk, and he was very intellectual, very clever, and a hardened atheist. And his wife became a Christian, and her life really changed, really turned around, which kind of shocked him slightly and slightly worried him. And so his wife used to come to a little Bible study group up at the vicarage at our house. So he thought he would go along. So he would come along and he would just argue. Every time he came to the little home group, he would just argue. And he had some great arguments. He had some great questions that no one could answer. And each time, he would kind of sit there at the end of the evening and feel really smug. Because he thought, I've won all the arguments, they're hopeless, they're pathetic, I'm good. And he'd go home feeling kind of really great, and everyone else go back feeling really kind of, oh, what can we do? And he did this probably for about 6 or 7 weeks. He'd come every week and would cause mayhem. And this one evening, again, he'd asked all his questions, he'd had all his arguments, and he thought he'd won. And just before they went home, the person who was leading the home group said, do you mind if we just sing a little worship song as we finish tonight? And so there was about 12 people in someone's sitting room, and they started to sing this little worship song. And Les looked around the room, and having won all his intellectual arguments, he just looked around the room, and he just for a moment thought, do you know what? But they have got something. I mean, there's something about their life. And just for a little moment, in his own heart, he gave the possibility that there was a God. Just the possibility that God might love him. And he kind of, just at that moment where he said, they've got something, maybe it's something that I could have. He had this kind of blinding, kind of almost this vision, and he kind of fell to the floor as if someone had hit him on the back of the head. And he had this vision of Jesus speaking with him, of Jesus saying that I've come to love you and to find you. That although you're intellectual, you've got all the answers, you are lost. And he starts to this grown man, competent job, competent intellect, starts to weep as he encounters God's love. And a son who was lost became found. And it was just a little moment where he chose. A little moment where he just gave the possibility for there to be a loving God. And I wonder for us this morning whether we give God just a little chance, a little window, a little opportunity that God could be there for us. God could be there for me. God could be the person who could show us love and care, to know God as Father. It's not just an invitation to know God as God, because other religions in this world can help you to know God as God. Other religions can help you to find God the creator or God the sustainer. Other people in the world, other religions in the world can help you to find a God that is transcendent. But only Jesus. Jesus says, no one can come to the Father except through me. Actually, Jesus is the only one who can bring us to the Father. And both the younger son, and I didn't read the end of the story, but there was a second son. There was a second son who was lost as well. The younger son was lost in a distant country. The older son was lost at home. He was at home, and when he heard that his runaway brother had come back, and when he'd heard that there was actually a party being thrown, and that this kind of wretched person who'd wasted half his dad's money was back there, and he'd worked all his life really hard. He'd never left home. He was absolutely crazy mad. And although he wasn't physically lost in a distant country, he was lost because for some reason he'd forgotten that his father was his father. Somehow he'd been serving all his life, been serving the family business, rather than encountering and knowing the grace and the love of God. And I wonder whether for us to encounter God as Father, what does that mean? I mean, for some of you, your fathers may have been great fathers. Some of you, your fathers may have been rubbish. I know for myself, there's times where I've done okay as a father. I know there's some times where I've done rubbishly as a father. I remember one time I was late to go to church on a Sunday evening, but bath time was my kind of responsibility. So Matthew was in the bath, thought save time, as well as washing them, I brushed their teeth at the same time as giving them a bath. So, and he wasn't being very helpful. And I had to go to church. I had to preach a sermon. Did he not know that I had responsibilities in life? And he was not being cooperative. And so I was trying to wash him and clean him and brush his teeth at the same time. So I had toothpaste on the toothbrush, put it in his mouth, rustled it round, and just as I pulled the toothbrush out, he bit down on the toothbrush. As he bit down, his tooth came straight out. Blood all over the place in the bath. There's it looked as though some kind of massacre had happened. So like any good father, I said, Bev, can you come and sort him out? I've got to go to church. And I go to church and I think, do you know what? I'm a rotten dad. And we make mistakes, don't we? But God calls us to know him as a father who's not a rotten dad. Actually, he's a good, a faithful. Actually, he loves you unconditionally. I mean, we hope to do that for our children, don't we? For Matt and Annie. I'm sure that the hope is that they would love Barney unconditionally. It's not dependent on what kind of grades he gets for his SATs. It's not how well he plays the guitar. It's not those things aren't going to depend. If you do that, we're going to love you. No, loved unconditionally. And actually, that's the same with God for us. He loves us unconditionally. He's a true, perfect, divine Father. And so as we come to worship now for a little bit longer, maybe take a chance to pray. I think the words that the Father says are the words that Easter is about. You were dead, but now you're alive. You were lost, but you're found. And that's the wonderful invitation, actually, for us this morning, whether you're somebody who's regularly here at Highgrove or a visitor. Actually, if you feel there's a deadness on the inside, a lostness on the inside, the good news of the cross is you can be found. You can find true meaning, find true purpose. You can find what it truly means to be alive. To be alive on the inside, to be born anew, born a second time. You can know what it is because of Jesus' death on the cross, of what it is to be alive. And in a moment, I'm going to take a chance to pray. And if you, just this Mothering Sunday, you'd like to know a fresh kind of love that's not to do with a human being, but to do with the love of the Heavenly Father. Just like that son, take a little moment to say, I turn around. I turn to find you. I'm not quite sure if you'll accept me, but I turn to you. And if you've come to church today and on the inside you feel a bit lost, you're not quite sure what direction to go in, you feel that life's lost some of its zest, and actually, because of Jesus this morning, you can know what it is to be found by him, to have your identity. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I'm a child of God. To be found in a family where you can be loved and accepted, and to know who God is. And as we think about this journey towards the cross, it's a journey, it truly is a journey of love. As we go on this journey, it's a journey towards us and to our world who are lost. And it's a journey towards knowing God as a Heavenly Father.